Good morning, everyone. Welcome to New Center Maine's Political Brew. Glad you could be with us on this Sunday morning. We are joined here in studio, which is a pleasure to say once again, by Republican Phil Harriman, former state senator and town councilor in Yarmouth, and Ethan Strimling, former mayor of Portland, also a Democratic state senator. Welcome. Good to see you back in the room again.
Good to see you, Pat.
Yeah, it's good to be here. This is like
Ethan.
the founding room from a dozen years ago. This is quite a feeling.
It's appropriate that our first topic is something of a flashback because at a recent Republican Party event, former Governor Paul LePage, who is running for office again, made unsubstantiated claims of voter fraud, claiming that he met voters who were bussed in from Massachusetts for an election in 2009.
I was the mayor at the time. They stayed at a hotel in Waterville overnight, voted, and left the next day.
When asked about that claim a few days later, LePage appeared to want to brush it off.
Do you actually think people were bussed in from Massachusetts to vote in Maine?
I don't know. That's ancient history.
Then Secretary of State Matt Dunlap said it didn't happen at the time. Now, this week, LePage also questioned whether tens of thousands of people should have been allowed to vote in Maine's 2020 election, claiming they did not have proper identification. Secretary of State Shenna Bello says that didn't happen.
If you vote twice in Maine, we will find you and prosecute you. It is completely untrue that anyone has ever been bussed in from outside the state to register to vote on election day and cast a ballot. That's simply not accurate.
Now, this discussion of voter fraud is all part of the push once again for requiring voters to present identification to vote at the polls. Secretary of State Bellows points out you have to have identification to register, and that has always been enough in the state. Phil, what do you make of this? Is this part of the new Paul LePage you're hoping to see?
Well, if you're going to run for governor and you're going to make claims like that, you need to be able to show the media and the public the proof that those claims are accurate. You can't say it on one hand and then say it's old news on the other hand. That doesn't fly. But to the other point you're making here is that I think you'll find that the vast majority of Mainers and Americans believe that you should have a voter ID identification card. I don't know why that's a political issue.
Ethan?
Yeah, this is if this is the new Paul LePage you were promising us in this election, it's unfortunately it's just the same old Paul LePage making statements that are untrue, that are veiled dog whistles, racist, and hopefully he's going to stop. And he shouldn't make statements like that, as Phil says, if he can't back them up. In terms of voter ID, look, you have to have an ID in order to register to vote in the state of Maine. What people are asking for is trying to create an additional burden which would make it harder for a lot of people to vote, and that's unfortunate. Now, if it's going to be part of a package in which we can try to find ways to expand voting rights, we'll talk about it, but he was just talking about an immigrant voting center. You want to expand voting rights to immigrants, and then maybe we make a bigger package with some kind of ID? Okay.
And that center you were talking about is the new Maine Republican Party office in the traditional Democratic stronghold of Portland. The party leaders say it's meant to be a spot to help immigrants get on their feet and find jobs, and they say that immigrants share Republican values. Maine Democrats counter that LePage and his party have not been welcoming to new Mainers, and opening an office in an election year isn't going to change that. Ethan, what do you make of this? And that was the event that Paul LePage was speaking at, making those comments again about bussing voters in.
Yeah, it's performative at best, of course. It's just an election year tactic. But hey, if Republicans all of a sudden want to be welcoming to immigrants for the first time, that would be awesome. Unfortunately, their track record from Donald Trump right down when I was mayor was very antagonistic, demonizing immigrants all the time, accusing them of bringing disease in, when immigrants are really the folks who have built this state for 200 years. Certainly the city of Portland built on the backs of Irish, Asians, Chinese, Somalis, across the board. And so we recognize that immigrants are very important. If Republicans want to join us, glad to have them.
But if they can peel off some voters in Portland and South Portland, places that the Republicans tend to not do so well in, is that going to make a difference in this election?
No, I don't think so. I think you've got to do more than simply put up a sign on a window before people are going to believe that you are actually supportive of their interests. So they're going to have to do a lot more in order to get those votes.
Bill?
Well, I think it's a great idea by the Republican Party, and I would just say for all of the viewers of Political Brew, Republicans do welcome immigrants. We just want them to come here legally. And the fact that the Republican Party is putting this initiative together to help them assimilate and find jobs, I'm aware of other efforts by Republicans to make this opportunity for them to find jobs much quicker and easier to find access to opportunities. So good for them and a great idea.
And again, if you get a few more votes in this neighborhood, well, who knows?
Maybe that'll begin a trend to return Portland back to its roots.
Oh, I don't know about that. And let's just be clear, in District 1 where that is, they're going to need to get a lot of votes to be able to turn that district. So.
True enough. In Washington this week, Senator Susan Collins pushed back against comments made by Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. In a tweet, Greene referred to Collins and Lisa Murkowski and Mitt Romney as pro-pedophile for their support of Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. Collins told reporters that Greene's comments are ludicrous, but she says, sadly, typical of what I expect from her. Phil, what do you make of that?
Well, it's the people that are broken in Washington, not the process. And whether you agree with Senator Collins for confirming Judge Jackson, that's, as she has said many times, the president gets to nominate. My job is to make sure that they have the qualifications. She did, so she voted for her.
But was this a red herring issue that had, many say, that had nothing to do with her qualifications to serve?
Yes, right. But if you look at how the Republicans behaved, as much as this is uncomfortable, they focused on her record. If you go back to what the Democrats did with, say, Brett Kavanaugh, they focused on, his high school yearbook. So this is not an easy process, but I think the Republicans deserve credit for focusing on her record, and she was confirmed as the first black woman on the Supreme Court.
Do we have a moral equivalency here, Ethan?
They did not focus on her record. I want to be very clear about that. They were trying to pull things out that had nothing to do with. They had all voted for her 10 years ago, and all of a sudden they started bringing up stuff that was happening before that, but somehow it changed their perspective. So let's be clear. This was all political, what they were doing. Most Republicans. I commend Susan Collins. I think she did the right thing in how she voted. Angus King as well. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, she's a thorn in the side of Republicans. She's awful in terms of what she's been doing. Hopefully she's being challenged very seriously in her race. Maybe there's a shot that she'll be beaten, but Susan Collins was right to push back.
And establishment Republicans like Susan Collins, Mitt Romney, people like that, certainly have some gravitas here, but do they have any real influence on changing that kind of rightward pull from let's face it, from the people that support the QAnon philosophy?
Well, I think they're going to have to do a lot more. If Susan Collins really wants to push back on that, she's going to have to do more than simply respond to a tweet. She's going to have to go to her leadership and say, stop it. Her leadership is really the one that's creating this kind of obstruction. There's no reason that Judge Jackson should only get 3 Republican votes, except that people wanted to use it as a political football.
2 former secretaries of defense were in Maine this past week, Bill Cohen and General Jim Mattis. They spoke at UMaine about America's leadership role in the world. And Cohen talked about how our deep political divide and the often ugly and angry words used by many political leaders cause other nations to lose faith in the United States. Ethan, is he correct about that?
I think there is truth in that for sure. Barack Obama, when he became president, I think did a very good job traveling the world, trying to restore people's faith in America after the Iraq War and all of the pushback on that and how many people were disappointed in our leadership. Donald Trump obviously undermined a tremendous amount of that, and we lost a lot of respect. So I'm glad that Bill Cohen is speaking out and talking about the fact that we need to get back to a place where we are respected on the international stage. It's a big lift for Joe Biden to try to get us there. I know he's trying.
Ethan?
Well, it seems to me that Secretary Cohen is exactly right. And from my perspective, when the elections were over, we used to put down all of our campaign signs and come together as Americans. We don't do that anymore. And until we can get back to that place, our impression around the world is going to be questioned.
Crunch time at the State House in Augusta, but we have not seen much partisan drama as we tend to see this late in the session. Phil, you've been through this. What's different now?
Well, I think, there's plenty of money, so usually it's a shortage of money that causes these problems. And I think by and large, there's an understanding in the legislature that we got to find ways to work together and get things done as opposed to get ready for the campaigns in the fall.
There is plenty of money, and why is that, Phil?
We're printing too much out of Washington?
No, we got a governor who's got our economy going and a president as well. So, but yeah, it is nice to see what's going on. I think it's a little early for us to declare that there is not going to be some partisan blow-ups for sure. Once the budget, as Phil says, even with money, there are going to be conflicts there. So it will be interesting. This is an election year, so each side always looks for their opportunities, and they want to do them as late in the session as possible so people remember. So I'm hopeful, but let's not count our chickens before they hatch.
And the hardest stuff is always left for last.
Right.
And the hardest stuff is always left for last.
There's been a big shakeup in Maine's healthcare industry this past week. Maine Health says its flagship hospital, Maine Medical Center in Portland, which is the largest hospital in the state, will no longer participate as an in-network provider of non-emergency care for Anthem insurance subscribers as of January 2023. Maine Health says one issue is that $70 million is owed by Anthem for claims over the past 3 years. Anthem says it was responding to what it calls unilateral increases in charges at Maine Med. The stakes here are high. Governor Mills has weighed in and urged companies to work things out. What's the role of the state here or the governor? Does she need to knock some heads together?
Well, she should do that, but could you find a better example of why we need a single-payer system, why we need Medicare for all, why we need to get rid of these insurance companies kind of battles? I mean, we need to have a universal health care system that covers everybody, that has a single payer like Medicare, and none of this would matter. It's incredibly disappointing that these two huge healthcare industries are battling each other, and the people who are going to lose out are the folks on the street who can't afford the health insurance or all of a sudden are going to have to pay.
What's at stake here?
Well, it's huge, and I think the governor or even Phil Harriman should help them kind of sort this out because it has implications for our entire state. It goes all the way from the providers who are, submitting claims for their services to Anthem to the role that Maine Health plays in the overall health care of our state. I'm optimistic now that this is now public that we're talking about it. Both sides don't want to be seen as the problem. Someone's got to get them to lace up together again, and let's find a solution.
Let's wrap up with our winners and losers in politics this week. Ethan, we'll start with you.
Yeah, my loser is just Anthem and Maine Med, like you mentioned. The two of them doing this battle is not good for anybody. My winners this week, an earlier subject, Senator Susan Collins and Senator Angus King for putting country ahead of their own party and voting for Judge Jackson. Just a tremendous day.
Phil?
My losers of the week are the 49 so-called, security officers of our country, intelligence officers who claim that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation. We're learning that it wasn't. The winner of the week for me is a story that you covered in News Center, Maine. Mikel Nunez, a state trooper who was injured in the line of duty, lost his leg, is back on full-time duty as a state trooper, and he's already climbed Mount Katahdin 3 times.
He is a man of steel.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you, gentlemen. Good to see you. Thank you for being with us. We'll see you next time. News Center Maine is back after this.